He did very well in school. He graduated from CU Denver, magna cum laude.
There is no question Matthew Riehl was a good student. After graduating CU, he moved to Wyoming, where he loved to hunt and fish, and he enrolled in law school. His future was bright. He had friends, and he had a sense of duty, joining the National Guard as a medic and eventually deploying to Iraq before finishing law school.
And even after he came home, he always kept his medic bag in his car in case he needed to help anybody.
But his mother says Iraq changed him. His medical records show he exhibited PTSD and anxiety related to his service.
I don't think he was mentally ill until after he came back.
In 2014, after he finished law school and was working in a private firm, Matthew Riehl had his first mental break.
I was visiting my younger son in Southern California, and we both started getting text messages from Matthew that made no sense.
She rushed to Wyoming, where she found him clearly disturbed.
All the windows inside were covered with like silver plastic material, and there were giant tubs of water all over the house.
So she decided to take him to the VA hospital in Sheridan, Wyoming for mental health treatment. And she removed several guns from his house for safekeeping. What were you concerned about?
Just that he could harm himself or others, or, that it probably wasn't a good idea for somebody who was mentally ill to have guns.
Riehl didn't stay at the VA hospital long. He first walked away and then later simply checked himself out, and his mother had to return his guns. As his mental health declined, so did his law practice. He eventually returned to Colorado to live in the basement of his parents' home. Records provided by the family show that he was receiving mental health treatment and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He was not found to have either suicidal or homicidal tendencies, but he was on antipsychotic medication. Then, in early 2017, his mother says he stopped taking his meds.
He became more reclusive. He stopped eating meals with the family and just wanted to be left alone. He had started an accidental fire in the microwave, and he was just seemed very disconnected.
The family was concerned and a little scared, so they reached out to the Lone Tree Police Department.
We were hoping that they could offer us some assistance to get him help. They went to the house and tried to talk to him, and that was what precipitated him moving out. For a long time, we didn't know where he was.
But Matthew Riehl knew where they were and began sending a string of bizarre emails that turned cruel and harassing, often prompting strange phone calls at night.
I think he was advertising that I was a hooker and posting my cell phone number on the internet.
This one falsely claims his mother was a transsexual prostitute who takes appointments at her home.
It was a crazy person picking on us.
Afraid?
Afraid, concerned, but unable to do anything because we had no ability to do anything to help him.
At the same time he was harassing his family, Matthew also began sending bizarre and apparently threatening messages to his former law school professors at the University of Wyoming. And he obsessively posted dozens of angry comments on his social media page.
They were afraid that he would harm somebody up there, and so they were all on the lookout for him.
And with good reason. A university dean asked campus police to patrol the law school because Matthew Riehl references the shooting today in Texas and referred to shooting someone dead on the streets of Laramie.
Scumbag, dirtbag, liar. He's the boss, huh?
Meanwhile, Matthew was also posting video on YouTube, harassing the Lone Tree Police Department and an officer who had pulled him over for speeding.
This cop needs to get fired.
He then began harassing Lone Tree city officials, and that brought in the Douglas County Sheriff.
Through a process of conducting the investigation, we had our community response team, which is a mental health response team, attempt to engage him.
Tony Spurlock is the Douglas County Sheriff. It was his deputy who was killed in the shooting. Other deputies were wounded.
We had a number of contacts and interviews with him through the doors or via phone.
Despite Matthew's erratic behavior and veiled threats, the Douglas County District Attorney told the Sheriff's Department in an email, "We have to balance the suspect's First Amendment rights with the Lone Tree Police Sergeant's rights. We do not believe the charges are appropriate at this time." So police took precautions.
I know that the Lone Tree Police had sent out a bulletin to all law enforcement around Colorado.
That information, available on in-car computers, could be seen by the deputies who responded to the call at Matthew Riehl's apartment.
This is why we flagged it. You know, use caution, mental health, threat to government, threat to law enforcement officers.
911, what is the address of the emergency?
And that is why around 3 a.m. on New Year's Eve, 4 Douglas County deputies, instead of just one, responded to the 911 call.
Yes, I do have some weapons. I own firearms.
Riehl was streaming his call live via his Periscope app.
Do you have probable cause?
I've already told you that we identified...
What's your probable cause?
Once outside, Matthew was cocky and loud, but not out of control, as he claimed his roommate assaulted him.
And I was really freaking scared.
Deputies finally calmed him down.
What's your first name again? Matthew. Matthew. Zack, good to meet you.
Shortly afterward, they left.
All right, Matt, unless there's anything else you need to tell me tonight, we're clearing out of here.
Just after 5 a.m., Matthew Riehl again called police, and they returned.
Hey, Matt.
Who's there? Who's there? Identify yourself.
It's Deputy Parrish, Douglas County Sheriff's Office.
May I ask who's there?
His demeanor was much different.
Can you help me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, let's do that.
I just feel like you're really upset. I'm not.
Well, I am.
Matthew continued to live stream the incident.
You not get that message?
Just.
He was displaying aggressive behavior, aggressive language. He had been throwing things.
They weren't even there to help.
Completely different than the 2 hours previous.
Civil division now!
He was clearly, at that point,
Out there stalking.
a danger to himself
Right?
and to others based upon all the totality of those circumstances that were there. Imminent danger right then.
And Deputy Zachary Parrish knew it. The threshold had been met for a mental health hold.
We're gonna take him. Put it in one.
But Matthew wouldn't come out. So a half hour later, entering the apartment with keys from Matthew's roommate, who was the leaseholder, they prepared to forcibly enter Riehl's bedroom.
They had a plan. They knew, hey, this is who's going to go in.
Is that his room right there? Yep.
We have to breach this door now because he has put stuff up against it.
And the sheriff says once it was determined he had guns and that he was a threat to himself and surrounding apartments.
You have to go in there and disrupt the situation to really protect that danger to others. I can't leave him in there.
The deputies brought shields designed to deflect a bullet and attempted to enter the bedroom where Matthew Riehl was holed up and raging.
Open the door! Sheriff's office!
In the barrage of fire, Deputy Zack Parrish died, and 3 other deputies were wounded.
They were not prepared for him to have as much weapon power behind that in that room that he had. The shield that they brought in does not protect us from high caliber rifles.
Went right through it.
Went through it like butter.
Later, a SWAT team went in. Matthew Riehl died in an exchange of gunfire. And yet another officer was wounded. 2 uninvolved residents of the complex were also wounded by Riehl. Even though they know he presented a danger that night, the family still has questions.
Nobody needed to die that night. He was cornered in his bedroom, in his apartment. They knew he had guns. What was the rush?
We still have to go through that door to go get this individual because he is now endangering everybody else, all the other people that I'm charged to protect.
I think that they could have called the family. We would have willingly come to talk to him, to try to get him to come out and try to get treatment.
You can talk to negotiators, you can talk to clinicians. I don't know the relationship between him and his mother. And he may be the reason why he is acting out right now is because he just got off the phone with his mother. And now I'm going to bring her into this mix.
But one thing both Tony Spurlock and Susan Riehl agree on is that the incident could have been prevented long before New Year's Eve.
That night should never have happened.
If we have the ability to intervene earlier, it is so much safer for everyone.
He was mentally ill. A family should be able to get additional help for that person.
To force some type.
Force some sort of intervention that instead of waiting for that critical harming themselves or others. I mean, that's a ridiculous criteria.
The Riehl family, many in law enforcement, the state public defender, and some prosecutors say the imminent danger standard is simply too high a bar.
Well, I think that if we were to adjust our statute, we would have been able to intervene much earlier and most likely would have been able to eliminate the situation on New Year's Eve from occurring.
Why don't we have civil or criminal remedies to at least do safekeeping for a period of time on these firearms so we know we have people in crisis?
Boulder County Sheriff Joe Pelly's son, Jeff Pelly, is a Douglas County deputy.
Where you at? In the chest. Okay.
He was shot and almost killed in the New Year's Eve incident and is now recovering. For years, Sheriff Pelly has dealt with issues of the mentally ill in jails as part of a task force on the governor's Colorado Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice.
The man that shot my son was obviously mentally ill.
Identify yourself.
He had a small arsenal of weapons. And we are in a place as the police and as a community where we can't do anything else about it until he snaps, until something bad happens. That's not good public policy, right?
Public policy in other states allows the family of a mentally ill person or law enforcement to petition a judge to force involuntary treatment and to store any weapons for safekeeping. They are called red flag laws. They are now in place in 9 states. About 20 other states and the District of Columbia are now considering such statutes. And the Colorado legislature is also exploring such a law.
If there are sufficient warning signs, we can now get a gun violence restraining order. We don't have to wait for another crime to occur.
Mara Elliott is city attorney of San Diego. There have been 19 successful petitions in her city for involuntary treatment of mentally ill persons who were deemed to show a pattern of threat or concern who had access to guns.
It's a measure to keep that person safe and people around that person safe and allow them the opportunity to get help.
And she says there are safeguards built in to protect the rights of the mentally ill, including a hearing within 21 days of the petition to the court. Neither police, the city attorney, nor the family make the final decision.
We need to prove to the satisfaction of a judge that there is a legitimate concern here that somebody is going to be a threat to themselves or to someone else. We're worried about lives here. So we have that burden of proof. On the flip side of it, the gun owner also has an opportunity to come to the court and tell their side of the story, to put their conduct into context.
We need that red flag law.
You need a lower statutory threshold.
We need a change in the statute to save lives.
Our research shows that this is an issue that affects tens of thousands of Coloradans that we know about. In 2017, statewide, 34,682 persons were deemed a threat to themselves or others. That's right, more than 34,000 people were placed on mental health holds in Colorado. And look at the numbers over the past 10 years. Over the decade, there has been an increase of 300%.
That's incredible.
For Governor John Hickenlooper, that is one more reason to support a red flag law in Colorado.
3/4 of our gun deaths in Colorado are suicides. Right? So the families right now oftentimes don't have any resource by which to separate their child or their loved one from the firearms by which they would either cause harm to themselves or others. In a state like Colorado, where we have a higher percentage of our people own guns, we should have a greater sense of urgency.
I oppose removing the word imminent.
Republican State Senator Kevin Lundberg voted against a red flag law in 2014 that would have removed the imminent danger standard for involuntary care. It failed because of concerns by both Republicans and Democrats about the rights of the mentally ill.
How about if we add some additional guardrails, some specificity, where if somebody maybe hits 4 or 5 markers of real problems, that could supersede the imminent term. But to simply remove it, it just opens it up too broadly.
But addressing the nexus of mental illness and guns goes much further than red flag laws.